short way. The next speaker is Adam Anderson. He studied in Munich, Harvard, Copenhagen, and now he is, among other things, the director of FactGrid, Cuneiform Wikibase. And I am very, at least I'm personally very interested in what he will tell us about this. So I give the microphone to you, Adam.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can't see you, but we hear you. We see only the Tower of Babylon
okay.
in the medieval way. Also nice.
Start the slideshow. Let's see. Yeah, is it working?
Yes, we see a library.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for the invitation to speak today. I've learned a lot about Silken and his fantastic work over the years thanks to your conference, and I'm pleased to say that there's a lot of similarities between what he's been working on and I think the general approach that I've taken towards the study of Assyriology, at least in terms of using digital methods. So I'm pleased to be able to speak about some of those today. The project that I'm engaged in with FactGrid extends beyond what I'm speaking on in particular today, but it's a unique opportunity to be able to talk with people who understand the context of Assyriology, especially concerning the many libraries that we curate as specialists, and those libraries which extend beyond primary sources to include a vast amount of secondary source material, some of which Enrique spoke of today, which was an excellent precursor to what I'm hoping to address. So I work, my current project involves data science, and as many of you have already know, and as many of you have heard today, there's a lot of interest in data science concerning what most people kind of generally refer to as artificial intelligence. I think that that's a pretty broad blanket term, AI or copy, and I think that I'm going to unpack some of what that means from the terms of, from a perspective of data science, in order to see how we can leverage these quantitative tools for bibliometrics, so the study of books and libraries in Assyriology. So, as most of you know from an experiential point of view, when you're looking for a particular source in a library, maybe like this one, or one that's curated better than this in university libraries, you often encounter unique ways of discovery that are not through a specific keyword search. You're looking for something, and maybe you remember the color of the binding, or you've alphabetized your library and you find authors who are writing on similar subjects within a call number. And that kind of discovery process is something that I think we all appreciate when we work within a curated library, especially departmental libraries. And I think that a lot of that has been lost in digitization. We can certainly find what we're looking for, but we can't find the things that we don't know we're looking for that might be related to what we're looking for as easily. It's of course possible, and we, I think, rely on the curation of digital libraries to provide those kind of similar sources, but I think that this is something that is increasingly challenging, and that is, to find what you're not looking for, but that you actually do want to know about. So that kind of discovery process is one that I think is critical for the continuation of research and scholarship, and I think for our own enrichment as specialists in the field. There's not only a vast amount of sources that have been published since the 1850s that contain transliterations and translations of tablets, but also the vast amount of discussions and interpretations taking place from that point forward. And to keep up with this steady stream of publications is a challenge for most of us, I think, but one that we are happy to be engaged in. The work that I'm pursuing here has to do with how we can use digitization and computational methods to help supplement that discovery and the kind of constant curation of new data as it comes into our field. So a lot of this is referred to as distant reading methods in data science. And the question that I'll be pursuing has to do with priority and similarity as we're looking for sources. And more specifically, how to find a prioritized list of sources with little input. Maybe we only have one source that we're looking for in particular, and we want to find what's similar, but we don't want to find everything that's similar. We want to see kind of a prioritized list. Beginning from bibliographic references, but expanding beyond the bibliography into other related sources, and both primary and secondary in a meaningful way. So genre plays a role in this, and I know that that's a very fuzzy, nebulous term for classification, but it's one that has, I think, shaped our understanding of how books and journals are related. And there's, I think, a number of genres within each domain of Assyriology and archaeology and Hittitology and Egyptology. Some of those genres overlap, like literature or administrative texts, economic genre, and others are unique within a given field or domain. The library catalog information, the way it's constructed by the Library of Congress, let's say, is kind of shaped by early notions of genre, and the way in which these different subjects were understood from antiquity even. So how can we measure document similarity is kind of the prevailing question. And we can do that, we know, through data science using observing patterns of topics or genre across a set of documents, observing word level and paragraph level similarity across a set of documents. That's commonly used in the Doctivec model, which I'll talk about a little bit more, and then observing full-length text level similarity across a set of documents that may be in different languages, in fact, and that's, I think, one of the serious challenges within our field is cross-linguistic, lingual similarity scores. So, looking at bibliometric links, we see that we can use or discover latent genres, meaning those that aren't necessarily explicit in what we're reading, but might in fact be connected through other means. So a problem that we kind of address where the documents are related by more than a simple citation. You know, the citations are very often used, and we've been using them as well to track which documents are connected in some genetic way. But and then on the other hand, genres, as they're kind of imposed on groups of texts, are sometimes too heavy-handed. So can we discover latent genres and emergent genres between sources or corpus? And to approach this, we use tools in natural language processing, such as topic modeling, word embedding, and transformers. So topic modeling and word embedding are approaches that use one or two layers, and transformers use multiple layers to approach a document set. And we can talk a bit more about what that means. In order to better unpack what these models are doing, I've used graph theory in order to obtain consistent network statistical analysis to show centrality and how documents are related consistently across these different types of models, whether it's a topic model or an embedded model using vectors. Just like this diagram here shows, if I and J are two different corpuses, and A through F are distinct books, the books C and D in purple would have what's called a high betweenness centrality, meaning that they're connecting two different corpuses, I and J, and therefore they would statistically stand out among the rest of those nodes because they're bridging a gap between I and J corpus, whereas A and B and E and F would have higher centrality scores because they're more central to the corpuses for I and J respectively. If you can follow that logic, then you can see how we can discover documents that we would consider different or outside of a given genre or corpus, but then in fact bridge a gap between them. And I'll illustrate this a little bit further using network visualizations. You can see here. Okay, so by and large, the use case that I'll be describing includes a small special collection of old Assyrian books and journals that we've digitized within the field of old Assyrian studies. But before I get into that, there's an important concept to understand regarding language models, and especially true for large language models, so like ChatGPT and Llama. Create their embeddings. They're creating a linear representation of space and time across multiple scales, and these linear representations can be highly advantageous when structuring and sorting data, not only in querying, as the article here by Gurnan and Hegmark, the language model represents space and time. It came out earlier this year. That reflect the fact that using Wikipedia locations, these language models can generally plot the locations of place names and in a spatial relationship. These maps are kind of included to help understand the plotting of these dots that are locations, and you can see that this is kind of a latent variable, something that wasn't encoded explicitly because the way in which these models receive in text is in a sentence. So we're not giving data with geocoordinates, but rather it's intuiting that through relational values that are given from words in an embedding space in a vector. Whoops, didn't do that. Okay. Let's see here. How do I get back to the... Okay, no, this is... Maybe I have to exit and go back. Pardon me for clicking on a link embedded there. Okay, this should be back to the full visual here. Okay, so in relation to this article, our findings in our study is that we have temporal similarity, meaning documents are related by explicit and latent temporal variables. So that certain names are embedded in their in a corresponding time. So if it was discussing Hammurabi, then that would be embedded in the Old Babylonian period versus, Shul that would be embedded in the War III period. Spatial documents are related by both explicit and latent locational variables. So Hattusha would be located in Turkey, whereas Eridu would be in Iraq. So these are points, as you can see in this, that based on large language models are embedded in this way. And the third that we found is that there is a latent genre, although the genre that I would use here, this term, which is again a very fuzzy term I know, is one that's different than maybe the explicit genres we use in our field. Okay, so just to illustrate quickly, I wanted to use the books of the Bible to show similarity between the canonical texts and the apocryphal texts. We know that there's already kind of genre designation for the Hebrew Bible that includes the Pentateuch, the historical texts, the wisdom literature, and then the major and minor prophets. So the question is, are there statistical differences between the apocryphal and canonical texts at the document and word level? And are there thematic similarities between these two different types of texts? And this is something that we can measure thanks to these types of models. So topic models are going to show us the similarity of documents within a latent topic, something that's not imposed by me, not necessarily the topics of the historical or prophetic texts, but rather those that emerge through the use of word frequency across the document set. And you can see that we have a component here that consists largely of the wisdom literature and some of the prophets. A component here that exists mostly of the canonical texts with the addition of Tobit and Daniel, and then smaller subsets of relationships that you can see that are interesting to explore and be interesting to look at for someone who wanted to understand how apocryphal texts might be related to the canonical works. In contrast to the topic model, we can look at doc-to-vec, which is an embedding approach, word embedding. It does it at the paragraph level. And then, so instead of looking at the color value from canonical and apocryphal texts, we're looking here at what's called betweenness centrality, that originating score. So the books that bridge between components the most include those that are in red or in earthy tones. And again, we can see that some of the apocryphal works, at least, are linked closest to the prophetic texts. They really have more sway, and the relationship between, say, the historical texts have, again, kind of holding the canon for the most part. But there's a lot of other detailed information to see when you're looking not just at the graph, but the statistical analysis. Each of these nodes have a degree between 0 and 1 in terms of their relation to each other. So, and those relations are quantifiable based on word similarity across document set. So it's a really interesting way of looking at reading these texts at a distance. So if that makes sense, if you follow that logic, then we extend that to the same methods to the works we found in Assyriology. And Of course, we can identify certain genres that include archaeological research, philological, text analysis, historical and chronological questions. But we're interested in seeing what kind of emergent topics and themes arise in a collection of secondary sources, and if we can measure these thematic similarities. Okay, so just to kind of break this down a little bit further, beginning with what's called word embeddings, or word to vec. You can see that if we take a word across this document set, such as history, that with it we get a list of subsequent words and their similarity scores. And we can see in this way that if we take the word history and the word Geschichte, in German, the word history, that there's a kind of analogy that the model is drawing, that history is to world as Geschichte is to Welt, which I think most of us would agree is a good embedding space for these terms. We look at certain names that we know are contextualized in chronological sequence, like Benno Landsberger. We can see that the subsequent names that come up with the greatest similarity are also researchers, but within Assyriology and Sumerology and other fields there that Landsberger worked in, but they're contemporaries with him as well, which is interesting because we can see the same with Beinhoff, that Jan Hedvig Derksen and Klaus Beinhoff and Måns Larsson worked together for decades on Old Assyrian studies. And what we see here are not only scholars within Old Assyrian studies, but also those that are contemporaries with Klaus Beinhoff. So again, embedding temporal and to some degree genre distinctions. And so word to vec consists of only a few layers, only 4 layers, whereas if we move into large language models, then you're embedding the transformers, and that consists of many more layers in an embedded space. So the relational values increase significantly. So looking at the results in a network graph helps us to see these relationships explicitly. And we can see that what these low-level embeddings like doc2vec, that they have boundaries that language can't cross very easily. So those documents that are in German or Turkish or French are kind of disconnected from the larger component of multilingual and English documents. But there are documents that are spanning. For example, the proceedings of the rencontre that in this year was largely in German, but there are of course articles in other languages, has a nice bridging span between them. So if we're looking for similar works or compelling works that are multilingual, we can find those using the kind of stand out. You can see using between the centrality that they really stand out, and you can see in that sense, I think, pivotal works that cross some of these different divides, language divides. There's also latent genres here that extend from history and archaeology down to the crux of Assyriology and over into kind of chronological observations. And that exists within each component. They have a kind of polarity of genre. And in contrast, if we look at topic modeling, we can see, again, still language divisions like Turkish and German, but that there's even additional subsets of components or clustering happening based on chronology, seals, and material culture, and the kind of body of Assyriology versus the specialized Old Assyrian works. And so these are unique ways of kind of clustering and classifying documents through topics and through word embeddings. The large language models are able to broach the language divide. So these documents are all in different languages, and what emerges in this polarity is more of a genre distinction. And I think that the genre distinction that it's exhibiting reflects something that's actually happening in our disciplines, which is that archaeologists and philologists are in fact not reading each other's work, or at least as readily, that they're kind of publishing in different areas and discussing different topics, which is fine, but that's reflected, I think, from what we're seeing here. So there's a kind of degree, you can measure that distance by degree of separation in a large language model. Whereas, say, topic modeling, you end up with clusters, and these clusters might not be linked or connected very well. So each of these models has been in development since 2019, and we're working on these to see if we can kind of find, again, a prioritized list when we have an input of something that we're looking for. But the end goal is to use the result of these to give prioritized list of references in a knowledge graph. So FactGrid is a knowledge graph structure graph database. And these typically are sparse on resources when it comes, or references when it comes to secondary sources. And looking to change that to include further tablets or primary sources, the most meaningful links to the entities that are named in the document, and to the documents themselves, of course. So that would include, so for a given tablet, we have geographic names that are listed that we can very often, or at least sometimes, localize to an actual geographic coordinate. And each of these entity types may or may not have a reference in the secondary sources, where in this case, Sylvan Koshak added a transliteration for KUB 3100, in which he provided transliteration of the city of Hattusha, which is really, I think, interesting and important to note. What you're trying to do is find the different ways in which it was represented textually, as well as the other cities that were mentioned in this text. And you can see their similarity in a knowledge graph as well. This can be extended, of course, to people and personal names for the study of prosopography and onomastics, and as well as things, so objects that are named in a given document. In fact, any word, every word is being lexicalized in Wikidata as well. So we're leaning heavily on this knowledge graph structure because it's becoming very increasingly clear that large language models, or AI in general, is prone to hallucination. Just as was demonstrated by the keynote speaker yesterday, that when the model doesn't know the answer, it doesn't say, I don't know. It produces something that's incorrect, and it sometimes embellishes upon that. So in order to constrain a large language model to factual information, there's an increasing trend or method now that incorporates knowledge graphs like this, or like Wikidata, into the language model to give it a more factual basis. And they're finding that the results of this make large language models less likely to hallucinate. So there's ongoing efforts to try to improve these existing large language models, or AI tools. But in order for that to be, to reflect our field of Assyriology, we have to engage with the knowledge graphs, I think, and we need to give it specialized knowledge. Otherwise, when the large language models don't have an answer, they'll continue to hallucinate. So a lot of this is being documented in terms of the tools and methods in our GitHub repository. The data sets that we're creating from this that are out of copyright will be included in both Zenodo and in FactGrid, both of which are open source and which should be highly accessible. Yeah, and I guess the idea then is that libraries like this one that I was very at home in will find a meaningful Sitz in Leben in the digital world. And I think that that will be an ongoing goal as the books, say in this library, maybe 10,000 are rather finite, but the books in our field somewhere around 300,000, 200,000 of which we have currently digitized. It's an ongoing and endless process. So it's one that I look forward to keeping up with. Okay. So thank you so much for your patience. I know I went over a bit. I apologize there.
Thank you for an interesting talk. I thought in the middle that maybe we can use this method for the Vergleiche Literatur of Silbin. I told you yesterday that I was discussing with him how we could structure that, because it's getting so much and you do not know what you expect. At the end I wasn't so sure anymore. What would you say? Can it be that we can connect it somehow with the titles, and then you can click and search and get an idea what is the what could be the relevant topics, or is there another way to go?
Yeah, so it really depends on if you have access to the body of the text. If you're only working from titles and bibliographic sources, then obviously these types of models are limited in that way. But if you have access to
these types of models are what?
Sorry again. So say your question.
Limited. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't hear. Limited. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there has been some work in that regard, just working with titles and abstracts, which are of course much more accessible in open source. But if you really want to go in more deeply into a full text analysis, like the one I've shown today, you need to have access to the full body of the text. So it depends on how much access you have to the documents now.
Yeah. But you probably have a lot of. You did it for all the Assyrian mainly. It was a test case.
This is the test case, all Assyrian, but it is being extended to all of the available sources that we've gathered so far that we have in the collection. So that's 200,000 books and journal articles and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is an interesting perspective.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Yeah, I look if there are questions. Looking down there in the chat. Some high AI assistant who helps Adam Anderson to take notes.
Yeah.
Okay, any other assistants who want to ask questions?
Yes, I would like to ask something. My question for Adam is maybe a bit, I don't know how to say. It is related to what you, Gertrude, wrote in your abstract. I don't know, Adam, if you read the abstract of Gertrude. I can read it for you. His last sentence was, in view of the hype surrounding AI, the question arises as to whether we will still need philologists and linguists in the future. And then in parentheses he said, or computer scientists. And I cannot forget this question. I mean, I am searching for an answer to this question for these 2 days. And now I would like to ask you, how would you respond to this question?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that when you engage deeply with large language models or AI, you realize there's limitations, and I think that Jeffrey pointed out some of those yesterday very, very nicely. But I think that what these models are capable of in some ways exceeds what a human can do in terms of speed and its capacity to find certain types of patterns and predict certain things that our human minds are maybe have more difficulty to do, such as predicting what might fill in the blank in a broken space of the text. But there'll nevertheless be many tasks that humans are going to be much better at for still, I think, many years. And that's especially true for our languages that are low resource and under-supported computationally, and that require a high degree of knowledge to understand certain things like hapax legomena, and the low frequency words and the finite number of contexts that we have. And I think that what we see is these large language models performing very well with English and other well-represented languages, but it breaks down with low-resource languages. And so there's certainly, for the large language models like Llama, I've tested out how well it understands cuneiform in terms of the Unicode, even, not just transliteration. And it's clear that there's an embedding that's happened that looks proper, looks right. So Gainsby is shekel, things like that. But there's certain words that are quite unique that are going to have a much more difficult time being embedded properly. So for philology, usually most philologists are not interested in the breadth of the language, but rather the depth. And we're interested in the esoteric words, the words that haven't been fully understood yet, certain plants maybe, or certain types of material culture that's mentioned very rarely. And I think that that's not something that AI is necessarily going to help us with anytime soon. And so I think for the few philologists that there are in the world, they're not going to lose their job by any means. So what they're going to gain is an assistant for maybe the more mundane tasks. And I think that that's the same that's happening in computer science, is that we're finding that we have an assistant for the mundane coding tasks, but that there's a high degree of specialization that is still needed for the fine-tuning and the fitting of specific high-level algorithms into code that the AI can't quite figure out. So complex mathematics are still something that the AI doesn't get right out of the bat. You'd think, well, it should understand math right away because it's working with math. In fact, the math that actually is making AI work, like backpropagation, these algorithms are really simple, or rather simple. It's calculus, but it's not like it's 100 lines of proof. And so I think there's still great need for mathematicians and applied mathematics in terms of computer scientists, as well as philologists, who in my mind fall into a very similar kind of space academically. Those who specialize in languages and are learning unique forms of the language in order to provide greater context, and I think that that's something that won't jeopardize those who are pursuing that. But if what you're trying to do is write a general article about the history of Babylon, then yeah, I mean, if that's your bread and butter, a generalist in the field, then yeah, there's going to be AI that can create content better than you can, perhaps, in the future, or in the present even. But, you know, all of these fields go into specialization very quickly. So, and for that, that's where these AI models will break down. So that's how I see things, at least.
Thank you, Adam. If I understood you correctly, you think that we will not have to know less, we will have to know more, actually. But the ways in which we are going to gain this knowledge are going to be different. Is this the case?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that it's to draw a similar analogy. I think we were all probably trained in elementary school how to do a basic arithmetic without using a calculator, even though a calculator was certainly a part of our lives at that time. So we were trained to learn more because we were trained to learn mathematics by hand or by memory, as well as how to use a calculator. And I think if what you're saying is we need to learn more, then absolutely we need to not only learn the field specialization, but we should also be learning how, say, Python tools will help us access the knowledge within our field in a different way, through maybe like these distant reading methods, or to help understand a broader context in terms of how a machine would learn that. And I think knowing both will enable a researcher or a specialist to use these computational assistants wisely, so that you're not, so essentially there's this term that's called automate the boring stuff, so that you can use automation for the things that are trivial, that require a lot of time for us to comb through, but that you are spending your time on the things that you can't automate yet using computational methods. I think that's the advantage, is that if done correctly with intelligent tools and an understanding of how they work, it'll enable the few philologists in the field to get more work done. So at least that's how I see what's to come.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. So we are definitely in things are changing, and we are already in that process.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your inspiring talk, and I congratulate you to this nice library you showed at the beginning.